Bruce Riedel looks at Pakistan's role in the global Jihad movement. It's the subject of his latest book, Deadly Embrace. From Politics and Prose Bookstore here in Washington, this is about 40 minutes.
Politics and Prose timing is indeed exquisite for a number of reasons. One is it is almost exactly now 2 years ago from the day in which I finished the first draft of the strategic review for President Obama on American policy towards Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we began the laborious process of vetting it through the United States government. It was almost exactly 2 years ago that I flew with the President on Air Force One to Los Angeles to go over it with him during the spare time he had on a 5-hour flight. At this point, I'm impelled to give my standard disclaimer. My views today are solely my views. They're not the views of the Obama administration or of the President, and please do not confuse whatever I have to say with the views of the Obama administration. Secondly, of course, as you noted in the introduction, we are in the midst of a major crisis between the United States and Pakistan. The deadly embrace has become literally quite deadly in the last month. Raymond Davis, who is apparently an American diplomat, I don't know who he works for. Don't ask me who he works for. I can't confirm who he works for. Shot to death 2 Pakistani citizens. A 3rd Pakistani citizen was killed by another American driving a vehicle coming to his rescue. And in the weekend after those deaths, the widow of one of the 2 committed suicide because she believed that her government would not stand up to the United States of America. The family has subsequently said that if Pakistan gives Raymond Davis back to the United States, they will all commit suicide one at a time. Now, that may all be a bluff, but there aren't a lot of governments in the world who are going to call their own citizens bluff on a threat like that. We have high drama, we have spy versus spy, and it comes after an increasingly difficult relationship over the last several months. In December, the CIA's chief of station in Islamabad, the highest CIA officer in the country, was named in the Pakistani press, what we refer to as he was outed. He had to be pulled out of the country literally overnight. If that wasn't bad enough, the New York Times and the Washington Post, citing CIA sources on background, said he'd been outed by the Pakistani intelligence service, the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, or ISI. Now, I've been engaged in liaison relations with foreign governments for many years. This is not normal behavior. We don't usually do this. We don't usually out each other and then talk about it in the newspapers. Since the arrest of Mr. Davis, the President has said very clearly he is a diplomat and must be given diplomatic immunity. We have already canceled a trilateral Afghan-Pakistan meeting to work on cooperation in the war against al-Qaeda and the Afghan Taliban. Pakistani President Zardari's March visit to the United States is in jeopardy, and President Obama's promise to visit Pakistan in 2011 is clearly in jeopardy. And if this wasn't bad enough, if you listen carefully to spokesmen on both sides, there's a sense of doom and foreboding behind this relationship. Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, General Kayani, was here last fall. When he went home to Pakistan, he said he was the most bullied man in the world. Again, that's not normal in mill-to-mill relations. And if you read carefully, there's clear concern in our government that there could be a 9/11 type mass casualty attack in the United States, datelined Pakistan at any time. Last May, we almost had one in Times Square. And there's concern there could be another Mumbai-style mass casualty attack in India, datelined Pakistan. And there's concern and I write about it in my book, that Pakistan could actually become a jihadist state. That's thinking the unthinkable in terms of Pakistan. It's not the most likely outcome by far. It's not imminent. It's not inevitable. But for the first time in Pakistani history, I think it's become a real possibility. The stakes here couldn't be larger. Pakistan is the sixth most populous country in the world with 180 million people. It will soon, within a decade, be the fifth largest country in the world. It is the second largest Muslim country, and it will surpass Indonesia within a decade. It has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world. Today, Pakistan is on the cusp of becoming the fifth largest nuclear weapons power in the world. For those of you who don't walk around with a little cheat sheet, who are the top 5 nuclear powers? They're, of course, us, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom. Pakistan is close to surpassing the United Kingdom, and it's on a trajectory that will make it the 4th largest nuclear power in the world. And Pakistan is the host to more terrorist groups than any other nation in the world. For a square kilometer, you can't find more terrorists than in Pakistan, with the possible exception of the Gaza Strip. And Pakistan has an extraordinarily complex relationship. On the one hand, it has been the patron of many of these terrorist groups. The group that attacked Mumbai in 2008, Lashkar-e-Taiba, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the ISI. And yet it is at war with others, the Pakistan Taliban, and it is an extremely violent war. Last year there were over 2,000 terrorist attacks in Pakistan. Somewhere near 10,000 Pakistanis died or were wounded. So how did we get here? Well, that's the subject that I try to address in The Deadly Embrace. And I try to do it by looking at 3 narratives and see how they interconnect with each other. The first narrative is Pakistan's own internal development. The second is the U.S.-Pakistani bilateral relationship. And the third is the rise of the global jihad, what we think of here in America as al-Qaeda, but which is in fact a much larger movement of like-minded organizations who share the same goals, if not the same leadership, as al-Qaeda. Let me briefly turn to each. Pakistan's internal history is a fascinating story, extraordinarily complex. At one level, there is a struggle between those who created Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who had a vision of a Pakistan that was going to be a modern, democratic, largely secular state that would look a lot like England in the Indus River Valley. Against him from the start were Islamic extremists who in fact originally opposed creation of Pakistan because they wanted to control all of the subcontinent and have now come around to waging war against India. Then there's the struggle between the civilian government and the military. Pakistan has a military which has seized power 4 times in some 60 years. One of those who seized power, General Zia-ul-Haq, rightly deserves the title of the grandfather of the modern global Islamic Jihad in the 1980s. He was our partner in the war against the Soviet Union. We'll come back to that. These various struggles interact constantly in Pakistan, making it a very unpredictable mix. And Pakistani history is also littered with murders and assassinations. From the first prime minister, who was murdered in 1948, to Benazir Bhutto, who was murdered only 3 years ago, to the murder of the governor of Punjab just a few weeks ago. In most cases, we don't know who did it. It's like we're reading an Agatha Christie novel, and we keep waiting for Hercule Poirot to assemble everyone together and tell us who did it, but they never do. They're all mysteries. The U.S. bilateral relationship is a roller coaster. We've gone up and down. We've been best friends, most allied country in the world, and we've been at each other's throats. If this was a soap opera on television, it would get #1 ratings because the drama is so high. All the ups are built around great secret projects. The U-2 base in Peshawar that flew over the Soviet Union, Nixon's trip to China, the war against the Soviets, and more recently the war against al-Qaeda. All of these secrets, of course, don't remain secrets for very long at all. They all come out. One standard, though, is that the United States consistently has always supported and endorsed the military dictators. We love Pakistan's generals when they take over. Sometimes at the beginning we're initially reluctant, but soon we come around. And it's bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats alike have fallen in love with Pakistani generals. There's also great individuals. Charlie Wilson, great movie. But also Larry Pressler, a little-known senator, who's the man whose bill cut off military assistance to Pakistan. When we cut off assistance, we told the Pakistanis we were not going to deliver 30-some-odd F-16 aircraft they had ordered and paid for. We weren't going to give them their money back, and we were going to charge them rent for taking care of them. Larry Pressler is not a well-known figure in America. Every Pakistani knows who Larry Pressler is. Pakistanis, as a consequence, have come to the conclusion America is a fair-weather friend. Pakistanis have numerous jokes about this, and I'll use the cleanest I can. Pakistanis think that America sees their country as a tissue. You use it, and you throw it away. I'll leave to your imagination what the other things that they come up with. Lastly, the global jihad. The global jihad was born in Pakistan in the war against the Mujahideen. The war against the Soviets. Don't get me wrong. I think what we did in the 1980s was the right thing. We changed history. We brought down an evil empire, and we freed millions of people. But one of the unintended consequences was to create a Frankenstein, which Pakistan has nurtured over the years. All Americans know who Osama bin Laden is today. What I try to do in my book is tell you about someone else, Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian who is the intellectual forefather of the global jihad. He wrote the formative pieces about al-Qaeda's philosophy and narrative. He is the founder, co-founder with Osama bin Laden of the Services Bureau, which became al-Qaeda. He is a co-founder of Lashkar-e-Taiba, the group that attacked Mumbai, and he is a significant figure in the founding of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So he's the trifecta of international terrorism. It's the combination of these three things together that has produced this uniquely combustible and dangerous Pakistan today. So what to do about it? Well, I've learned in book talks that I'm supposed to leave you with a tease and not tell you the last chapter, otherwise why would you buy the book? So my tease is, my answer to what to do about it is in the last chapter. But I'll start with a very simple rule. Humility. 60 years of American interaction with Pakistan demonstrates we can do a great deal of harm. There's very little evidence we can do a lot of good in Pakistan. So take the Hippocratic Oath to begin with. Do not support the generals at the expense of the civilian politicians, even though the politicians are as corrupt, despotic as can be. There are no heroes in this story. There's no Thomas Jefferson. There's no John Adams. There's a lot of Aaron Burrs, but that's what we got to work with. Secondly, there are no magic bullets. There's no simple solution to this problem. We can't buy off Pakistan. We tried to do that in the last decade. We gave them $12 billion in unaccounted funds. That's an estimate, because nobody in the United States government knows how much we actually gave them. We can't invade them. This is a country twice the size of California, with the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world. Invasion is crazy. But under some circumstances, you can envision an American president with very few options other than the use of military force. There are extraordinarily difficult trade-offs in this relationship. And the most difficult ones revolve around the nature of our relationship with the ISI. The ISI is our most important partner in the war against al-Qaeda. The ISI has delivered more al-Qaeda prisoners and has given us more targets than any other liaison partner in the world, and yet is our most difficult partner at the same time. Leon Panetta, in hearings just a few weeks ago, summed it up. This is the most complicated thing he has ever seen in government, and Leon Panetta has been around in government for a long time. Just one final comment before I take your questions and comments. The research for this book is obviously difficult to do. We're talking about secret intelligence organizations. The CIA does not like to have its truths revealed, even by its own former employees. The ISI doesn't like anyone to smoke around the ISI. And despite my many requests, al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden have consistently turned down my requests for interviews. I've always requested an interview by interactive camera so that we'd actually get together. What I have been able to do is, over the course of many years, both in government and since I left government, speak with and interview many of the key figures in this story, including 4 presidents, including secretaries of state, including every American ambassador to Pakistan, including every director general of the ISI since the 1980s. I spent a great deal of time with Mrs. Bhutto. I've spent time interviewing President Musharraf. Did they all tell me the truth? Of course not. Duplicity is at the essence of this relationship on both sides. But I think I've at least done the conscientious job of reaching out and trying to get everybody's story. And with that, I look forward to your questions. And if you want to ask me what to do about it as the first question, of course I'm going to tell you.
Go ahead. Here.
Well, if you can summarize what you're going to do about it. It was a very tempting tease.
The United States needs to do several things. First of all, we need to make sure that when we work with Pakistan, we do not undermine the civilian government authority. That doesn't mean not dealing with the military, but it means always ranking our priorities and engaging with the civilians first. Not because we're in love with President Zardari or his likely replacements, but because we should be supportive of a process. One of the things I would emphasize about Pakistan today is that when you look back over its history, this is a country that has fought consistently for democracy. Not very effectively, but they've gotten rid of 4 military dictators. It's not Egypt. Egypt sat under a military dictator for 30 years. Pakistan does not sit still. Pakistanis want democracy. There are constituencies in Pakistan that are seeking democracy, and we need to help enable them, not undermine them. Secondly, and I'll just mention 2, we need to address the issue that obsesses the Pakistani army, and that's their relationship with India. When the president set up the Afghan-Pakistan Special Envoy Office, he got half right. You can't deal with Afghanistan without dealing with Pakistan. But the other half is equally important. You can't deal with Pakistan without addressing India. We cannot be a mediator between India and Pakistan. The Indians will refuse that. But we can be a facilitator. And an otherwise somewhat grim picture tonight, let me give you one piece of good news. Last week, after Pakistan and India agreed to resume their high-level bilateral negotiations process, which was suspended after Mumbai. Not because either side thinks there's a great chance of success, but because both sides realize there's no viable alternative. And we should encourage that process. There are things that we can help do to push India and Pakistan towards a resolution of their small differences and ultimately their big differences. Let me give you one small difference. If you want to fly from Islamabad to New Delhi, you can't get there from here. You got to go to Dubai. You got to go to Kathmandu. You got to go to Tehran. There are almost no direct flights between these two countries. there is less than 1% of their GDP is engaged in trade with each other. This is not normal. This is not natural. Encouraging change in South Asia big is the big idea the United States should support.
Could you please comment on Pakistan's dilemma in trying to prevent the forces crossing their borders into Afghanistan that continues as such a concern to our forces, knowing that the enemy seems to be escaping into Pakistan so frequently?
The forces we're fighting in Afghanistan are primarily the Afghan Taliban that comes in several different flavors. The Pakistani government in the 1990s did not create the Afghan Taliban, but they were the midwife to its creation. The Pakistani army believes to this day that the Afghan Taliban is an asset for them, that sooner or later the Americans are going to leave Afghanistan, and there will be a struggle for influence there, and their biggest asset is the Afghan Taliban. Up until a year or so ago, they believed victory was in sight. They were going to win in Afghanistan. We were going to pull out. Hold on to your asset if you think they're about to win. But over the course of the last decade, the Pakistani Taliban has also, the Afghan Taliban has also given birth to a mini-me, the Pakistani Taliban, which targets the government of Pakistan. So the Pakistani military has an extraordinarily difficult job of trying to parse the difference. They are still convinced the best way to deal with this is to fight those who are your enemy and use those who are your asset for the future. The United States, in a very American way, of course, says, do more. You got to take the entire thing down. Pakistanis look at us and say, you're hopelessly naive. First of all, you won't be here when push comes to shove. We'll be on our own. Secondly, we need these people. We want to continue to have relationships with them. This conflict over this fundamental issue is what is at the heart of this spy versus spy battle today going on in Pakistan. These different points of view.
My name is Sadas Begum. I immigrated from India to United States 30 years ago. And my question is, in the event of a peace between Kashmir and over Kashmir between Pakistan and India, there were reports even Musharraf once went to have a ceasefire or an agreement on the line of actual control now between Pakistan over Kashmir. So my question is, if the army could control after this peace the Islamic radicals in Pakistan, will there be ever a solution or will there be a time where Pakistan could be like India? Because Thomas Friedman wrote 2 years ago comparing Pakistan and India, where a secular democracy in India gave rise to what India is today, whereas a military dictatorship and the Islamization of Pakistan by Ziaul Haq had led to all those madrasas and all. So my question, will there ever be, because the people are the same culture and the language. So your comment and answer.
It's a very important question. Let me, just for the benefit of the rest of the audience, put a little bit of perspective here. General Musharraf, after he first tried nuclear intimidation, a small war, several high-profile terrorist attacks, and threats, came around to diplomacy. He was a slow learner, but he got to the right outcome. The outcome that he negotiated with the Indians, and I've talked to him about it, and I've talked to the Indians, and everyone agrees on what it was a deal in which the ceasefire line in Kashmir would be recognized as an international border so that India's territorial integrity would be respected, but it would be a permeable border for Kashmiris, so Kashmiris could go back and forth. A little bit this is an exaggeration, like Maryland and Virginia, a lot more like Schengen in Europe, where there's not a lot of border stoppages. Unfortunately, Musharraf's sell-by date with the Pakistani people expired at this critical moment. He says his partner in this negotiations was General Kayani, now Chief of Army Staff. And if that's true, then there's some glimmer of hope here. This is a good deal for India. Indians who think about it may feel some level of satisfaction in watching their rival in trouble. But if they think about it at all, they know that their vision of a bright, shining India, one of the great leaders of the 21st century, is impossible if you are connected to a failed state, or worse, a jihadist state next door, which has hundreds of nuclear bombs targeted on you. And I'm convinced Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in particular understands this. It's a good deal for the Kashmiris more than anyone else. They have lived in a nightmare for many, many years. The hard part is selling it to Pakistan. The good news here is President Zardari wants to do it. That's why he embarked on a new peace process when he came into office. That's why Mumbai happened. The dark forces in Pakistan deliberately wanted to prevent it from going through, and they carried out an operation to do so and succeeded. We cannot make this happen, but we can help Indians and Pakistanis make this happen. We can be cheerleaders. We can go to the UN Security Council for reaffirmation and support. We can give them ideas. But we have to do it in a way that is very uncharacteristic. We cannot talk about it all the time. We cannot have a special envoy for Kashmir. We cannot give constant press reports on how we're doing. We've got to be sophisticated, subtle, and under the radar screen. Now, many of my colleagues who've worked in the U.S. government say, I'm dreaming. We can't do it. But Pakistan is a country that it's easy to be pessimistic about, and it'll take you nowhere. So we have to try to raise our game and raise our sights and see if we can help them do it.
Hi, one question and 2 points. Your capo di capi, Don Leone Panettone at Langley, said there are already 50 Al-Qaeda. So why are you scared of 50 Wahhabis and spend $10 trillion chasing them? The other point is, I urge you not to talk Pakistan or Afghanistan. This is a collection of nations. There are 90 million Punjabis with a Punjabi army that's misruling the country. There are the Sindhis, there are the Pashtuns especially, troublemakers. And Sunni Shia agendas. And these countries, the borders are carved out by 3 Brits and 1 German, otherwise known as Lord Mountbatten, Prince von Battenberg. And that's a terrible thing that happened with the partition. And I'm an Ismaili, and we have maybe 2.5 million. We're as a combination of Mormons and Unitarians. Okay, that's the Muslim equivalent.
I've never heard Ismailis do it. Characterized as Mormons. I'm going to steal that line.
We have direct connection to you upstairs.
I'm going to steal that line.
And wishy-washy being like Unitarians, all right? But you know how the massacres have occurred amongst the Hazaras by the Sunni Taliban. We Ismailis have been slaughtered by the Sunnis for the last 1,000 years, so we're hardwired. What I'm getting information now from Pakistan is that the community is paranoid. The country is collapsing. These Taliban are murdering. They've shot out people. They've smashed it with what we call Jamaats, they call mosque otherwise. And everybody who is well connected is being asked in the diaspora to help pull these people out and get visas. So my view, and I've been in this game for 40 years, is that Pakistan is a conceit. So is Afghanistan. It's collapsing. And just like other places, like Sudan, new nations, new states are being created. And very few people are prepared for that chaos.
You and I think, are in close to violent agreement about Pakistan's problems today. You brought up more of the divisions within Pakistan between the Punjab majority, which dominates the officer corps, which sees the country as basically a Punjabi estate in which everyone else is a second or third class citizen. That's absolutely true. You raised rightly the growing strength of extremism, highlighted by the murder of the governor of Punjab. An extraordinary thing. His own bodyguard shoots him to death, and the bodyguard gets all the favorable attention. 1,000 lawyers go to protect him. The battle for the soul of Pakistan is underway today. How it will turn out, no one knows. There are a lot of very dangerous possibilities. I'll just make one comment about 50 al-Qaeda. With all due respect to the Director of Central Intelligence, I've been engaged in the business of counting insurgents and terrorists for some 35 years. We don't have a clue. And anyone who says they know how many there are is either bluffing or something worse. Al-Qaeda is a lot more complex problem than 50 individuals. And I wish that the United States government would get out of the business of body counts. We learned in Vietnam that's not very helpful. And get into the business of thinking about our enemy in a more flexible way.
First, picking up on your theme with regard to the global jihadist movement and broadening the scope of the discussion a little bit, how do you see the global jihadist forces interacting, dealing with, and coping with the pan-Arab change that is as yet undefined but clearly in play?
Right.
Because this is a very interesting struggle, and it, I think, could have serious implications for a lot of things here. And a lot of people are talking about it but probably don't know a whole lot. Your opinion would be very interesting. And the second, just recalling some figures from the past, I wonder what you think about the future of Colonel Gaddafi.
I think Colonel Gaddafi's shelf life can now be measured in days. I certainly hope that's the case. He has demonstrated what he's been for the last 40 years dramatically to the world. All the myths have fallen. He's a murdering terrorist. He killed several hundred Americans, Pan Am 103. He's been engaged in one act of terror after another, and I hope this is the end game. I don't see a negotiation between the opposition and Colonel Gaddafi like between Hosni Mubarak. The Egyptian revolution, I think, is much more significant. Al-Qaeda has been caught on the back foot, really taken off guard. Al-Qaeda's philosophy was the only way to bring about change in the Arab world was jihad, violence, terrorism, and that violence and terrorism should be directed against the Crusaders and the Zionists. That's you in this room. What's happened in Egypt is regime change through a largely peaceful, not 100% peaceful, but a largely peaceful, mass-based movement. This doesn't fit the model. The Al-Qaeda leadership, in particular Ayman Zawahiri, the number 2, an Egyptian, who's fought Hosni Mubarak his entire life, who participated in the assassination of Anwar Sadat 30 years ago, was unable to put out a statement for almost a month. He finally put a statement out last weekend. And guess who's to blame? Napoleon Bonaparte. Whoa! Yep. Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt 200-some years ago. He set upon the decline of the Islamic world, and it's all his fault. Now, he's promised additional statements to bring us up a little bit quicker to the current day. And while this is very consistent with Al-Qaeda's narrative and history, it shows you a little bit of how off-put they've been. But there are several scenarios in which they can come back. If the promise of democracy now turns into something much less, then there will be a radicalism. In Libya, we don't know who those kids are. We don't know who they're fighting for, who they're listening to. In Yemen, we know part of the opposition is al-Qaeda, not all of the opposition. So for now, they've suffered a setback, a certain humiliation. It's good news for us, but this game is just beginning. You know, the easy part of a revolution is toppling the dictator. The hard part is building a democratic, stable country that provides jobs for 85 million Egyptians. That's a really hard thing to do.
How many people we got allowed there? Okay, two more questions.
Okay, a quick question on the general geopolitical scene around Pakistan. China has a border with Pakistan and India. Iran has a border with Afghanistan. And they have their own agendas and they have their own strategic imperatives. The Chinese actually have a lot more influence in Pakistan than the US does. Although they take our money, but the influence is really coming from China. They call them the all-weather friends.
That's right.
And China does look at the US as a quasi-adversary, and they look at India as a quasi-adversary. And I'm wondering whether they have a vested interest in actually creating some instability or encourage, like just today's New York Times has a story that they funded and gave the technology for a nuclear reactor to make bombs to Pakistan. Just now, in this world of non-proliferation and all this other stuff, they are encouraging the Pakistanis to build nuclear bomb material. What's your take on the Iranian and Chinese, and do you discuss it in the book, or is it focused on?
Right.
Thanks.
Briefly, you characterize China quite rightly. From Pakistan's perspective, they're the all-weather friend. If we're the fair-weather friend, they are taller than the Himalayas and deeper than the Indian Ocean. In practice, while they've given Pakistan a lot of weapons and nuclear reactors and the design for its bomb, in every clutch situation, the Chinese haven't done anything more than we have. China's short answer is China is in a quasi-rivalry with us and with India, but it's also in a relationship with us and India, which is an economic cornucopia. And China is trying to figure out how to balance all of this together. So for me, the high road here is to try to get the Chinese to row with us in this. They don't want a jihadist state in Pakistan. They don't want to see the Indian economy suffer a devastating blow because they're investing in the Indian economy now. Tricky, hard to do, but something that we can do. Iran is a more difficult partner. The short version is, in Afghanistan since 2001, Iran has largely been a supporter of what we want to do because they hate the Taliban. The trick here is to somehow segue off their relatively positive pursuits in Afghanistan from the so many other things where we have very serious disagreements with them. That's a very tricky diplomatic problem to pursue.
Your admonition to do no harm, does that suggest that the drone attacks are counterproductive?
I'm glad you brought this up. If I were to teach, I teach at Johns Hopkins SAIS, if I were to teach a course in decision making, I would use the drones as a classic example. The drones, which is an operation President Obama inherited from President Bush. President Bush created the infrastructure. Obama very skillfully has exploited it, but it started under Bush, are our only real way of putting pressure on al-Qaeda in Pakistan today. And it works. It has put a lot of pressure on them. Ayman Zawahiri used to put out a new message every other week. Last year he put out 4 messages. 2 of them were less than 50 seconds in length. And it's not because he got laryngitis. It's because he fears the drone. On the other hand, the drone is incredibly counterproductive. Even though the ISI provides a lot of the targeting information for it and is a beneficiary when it kills the Pakistani Taliban. This is a classic example of what's really hard in making decisions in government. There's not a naturally easy solution. I'll be 100% candid and upfront. I am a supporter of drone operations. I recommended increasing drone operations 2 years ago. But I think we also need to be very careful not to become drone addicted. The drones are a platform and a weapon system. They're not a strategy. They're a means of putting pressure on al-Qaeda. They will never destroy al-Qaeda. We cannot destroy al-Qaeda from 30,000 feet in the air. Pakistani cooperation is essential to doing that in the end. But this is a real-world problem. If we don't keep the drones up, the danger of a mass casualty attack in the United States will increase very significantly. If we keep doing them, we drive away a significant part of the Pakistani people. There's no simple answer to this problem. In the long term, the best answer is to get the Pakistanis to take ownership of the drone operations. But the Pakistani government doesn't want to take ownership of it. It much prefers to let Barack Obama and Leon Panetta take all the flack. It demonstrates the contradictions that are at the heart of our relationship with Pakistan and which make it such a difficult partner to work with these days.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.